What if the most powerful foods on Earth aren't in a supermarket, but buried in our past? What if the secrets to survival and health aren't in a lab, but in a forgotten garden? My Soviet grandma survived harsh winters and scarcity, not just with grit, but with a secret collection of plants, a garden full of forgotten vegetables that science is only now beginning to appreciate. These were her secrets, passed down through generations. Today, we're unearthing 15 of them. This isn't just about strange vegetables. It's about lost wisdom, incredible resilience, and the knowledge our ancestors held in their hands and in the soil. It's a journey back to a garden that time forgot, to rediscover the foods that deserve to be remembered. The black radish that cured winter colds. Before drugstores had a remedy for everything, my grandma had a secret weapon buried deep in the frozen soil, waiting patiently in the dark. It was the black radish, a root as black as coal that smelled of damp earth and a hidden fire. When a winter cough took hold of the house, she would descend into the cellar and return with one of these dense, heavy orbs. In the warm kitchen, she would scrub its dark skin clean, then grate the fiery white flesh into a bowl. The sharp scent would fill the air, making your eyes water. Into this pungent snow, she'd stir a heavy spoonful of raw honey, watching it turn from a golden ribbon into a potent, glistening syrup. This homemade remedy could soothe the deepest cough. It was a simple root, but it was proof that the toughest plants, those forged in cold and darkness, often provide the most profound comfort. Kohlrabi, the Sputnik of the garden. My grandma's garden had a vegetable that looked like it had fallen from outer space. It wasn't a root, and it wasn't a cabbage. It was a pale green globe that hovered just above the soil, with long, leafy antennas reaching for the sky. She would laugh and say it looked like Sputnik. On hot summer days, she'd pull a young one from the earth, and with a well-worn paring knife, she'd peel its thick, fibrous skin away to reveal a crisp, almost translucent heart. Handing us slices, she'd tell us to eat it before it warmed up. It was as juicy and refreshing as a fresh apple with a hint of pepper. But it could also be cooked in stews, where it became tender and sweet, a perfect sponge for savory broth. It was a delightful paradox, an alien-looking vegetable that was one of the most versatile and comforting foods of the summer. The secret to green borscht. Every spring, after months of gray skies and melting snow, my grandma would hunt for the first signs of life in her garden. She wasn't looking for flowers, but for the first tender, spear-shaped leaves of sorrel pushing through the cold mud. These weren't just any leaves. They were the key to a legendary soup that tasted like springtime itself. She'd gather a whole basketful, wash the grit from them in cold water, and cook them down into a vibrant green borscht. The sorrel's powerfully sour, lemony tang would be mellowed with earthy potatoes, fresh dill, and a generous dollop of thick, cool sour cream swirled in at the end. That first spoonful was the official declaration that winter's long siege was finally over. It was more than a meal. It was a ritual, a taste of pure, green hope that promised the abundance of the coming months. The scalloped Patterson squash. Forget the common zucchini. In my grandma's garden, there was a squash that looked like a tiny ivory white flying saucer. With its elegantly scalloped edges and delicate skin, the Patterson squash seemed too beautiful and whimsical to eat, but it was a beloved summer staple. Their shape made them a joy to prepare. Because of their small size, she would often pickle them whole, filling large glass jars with dozens of these little discs, suspended in a clear brine with fragrant heads of dill and whole cloves of garlic. The summer kitchen would fill with the sharp, clean scent. Other times, she'd hollow them out and stuff them with seasoned rice and herbs before baking them until perfectly tender. They had a firm texture and a subtle, nutty flavor that was far more interesting than their watery cousins, a playful vegetable that sparked the imagination as well as the appetite. Sea buckthorn, the forbidden gold. There was one bush in the garden my grandma called Siberian gold, but she always warned me not to touch it. Its branches were a tangled web of vicious, needle-sharp thorns, all of them guarding dense clusters of berries so bright orange they seemed to glow with their own inner light. This was sea buckthorn. Harvesting it was a slow, deliberate battle. Dressed in thick gloves, my grandma would carefully snip entire branch tips, freezing them so the delicate berries could be knocked off without being crushed. The reward for this effort was immense. The berries were incredibly tart. But when crushed and sweetened, they made a thick, vitamin-packed juice, revered as a tonic against winter illness. It was a treasure you had to fight for, a burst of defiant, liquid sunshine that was carefully rationed out during the darkest, coldest days of the year. The chokeberry that stained everything. My grandma grew a berry so dark and intense, it would stain your hands, your clothes, and your tongue a deep, royal purple for days. She called it Chernoplodka, the Aronia berry, and its common name, chokeberry, was well earned. Eating one raw was a memorable mistake. Its astringent taste would suck all the moisture from your mouth, but she knew its secret. When cooked and sweetened, its harshness transformed into a deep, complex flavor. She would press the berries to make a thick, inky concentrate, which she preserved in bottles for the winter. It was a powerful elixir, rich in antioxidants, taken in small sips to ward off sickness. The taste was rich and profound, a little sweet, a little bitter, and deeply earthy. It was a serious berry, one that felt ancient and demanded respect. The humble, forgotten turnip. Long before the potato became the undisputed king of the Eastern European table, another root filled every cellar and every stomach. It was the humble turnip, a vegetable so common and unassuming that nobody thought to celebrate it. Yet it faithfully kept families fed through the longest winters when little else was available. My grandma would pull them from the cold ground, their purple tops vibrant against the snow. She would roast them in the embers of the pechka, the big masonry stove, until they were soft and their natural, earthy sweetness intensified. She'd also add them to hearty stews, giving the broth a subtle, peppery body. While modern tastes pushed it aside for the more versatile potato, the turnip was the true workhorse of the old world garden, a symbol of resilience and quiet, dependable survival. Lovage, the soup herb that tasted like a whole garden. In the shadiest corner of the garden stood a towering plant that my grandma used in almost every soup she made. She said one leaf was enough to season a whole pot, giving it a flavor that was like celery, parsley, and something ancient and wild all at once. This was lovage. It grew over 6 feet tall, a lush and fragrant giant that you could smell from across the yard on a warm day. She'd chop its hollow stems and potent leaves into chicken broth or a simple potato soup, instantly transforming a humble meal into something deeply savory and aromatic. It was her secret ingredient, the one that made everything taste more intensely of itself. We never saw it in stores, which made it feel like her special magic, a bold, unforgettable flavor that belonged only to her garden. Jerusalem artichokes, the unkillable root. My grandma had a patch of towering sunflower-like plants that hid a secret underground. They weren't from Jerusalem, and they weren't artichokes. They were knobby, resilient tubers you could leave in the ground all winter and dig up whenever you needed them, even from under a blanket of snow. She called them topinamber, and once planted, they were impossible to get rid of. They spread with a wild, stubborn energy, which made them the ultimate survival food. When sliced and roasted in a hot oven, their flesh became incredibly sweet and nutty, with a creamy, satisfying texture that was absolutely delicious. They were the garden's most reliable residents, a self-sufficient and unkillable crop that guaranteed there would always be something hearty to eat, no matter how harsh the season became. Quince, the rock, hard fruit with a perfumed soul. My grandma grew a lumpy yellow fruit that was as hard as a rock, and so astringent it was completely inedible, raw. But when she cooked it, a kind of magic happened. The entire house would fill with the most incredible floral perfume, and the tough, pale flesh would slowly transform into a beautiful rosy red jam. This was the quince. Every autumn, she would peel and core the stubborn fruits, simmering them for hours on the stove with sugar and a little water. The slow heat worked a kind of alchemy, turning the hard pieces into a tender, jewel-toned preserve that tasted of apples, pears, and exotic flowers. It was a fruit that demanded patience and effort, keeping its fragrant soul hidden until you took the time to unlock it with warmth and care. A jar of quince jam was a prized possession in winter. Purslane, the weed we ate on purpose. During the hottest, driest days of summer, when the lettuce would bolt and the spinach would wilt, my grandma would go out and gather a weed that grew in the cracks of the stone pathways. It had thick, fleshy, succulent leaves and a slight crunch, and she would toss it in salads like it was the finest green from the garden. This was purslane, a resilient plant that thrived on neglect and heat. It had a wonderful, slightly salty and lemony flavor that was incredibly refreshing on a sweltering afternoon. To her generation, there was no such thing as a useless plant. Everything had a purpose if you knew how to use it. Purslane was the perfect example of her resourcefulness. A delicious, nutritious meal that cost nothing, required zero effort, and appeared right when the cultivated greens gave up. Scorzonera, the dirty stick with a royal taste. One of the ugliest vegetables in my grandma's garden was a long, black root that looked like a dirty, dried-out stick. But she knew that if you took the time to peel away its dark, grimy skin, you'd find a treasure inside that tasted of oysters in early spring. This was Scorzonera, or black salsify. Getting to the creamy white flesh was a chore. You had to peel it under water to keep it from discoloring, and the black skin would stain your hands if you weren't careful. But the effort was always rewarded. She would boil it gently and serve it simply with melted butter and a sprinkle of salt. It had a sophisticated, delicate flavor that felt like a true luxury. It was her forgotten delicacy, a powerful lesson that the most unassuming packages can often hold the most wonderful surprises. The everlasting spinach patch. My grandma had a patch of spinach that you only had to plant once. It wasn't true spinach, but something much hardier and more resilient. A perennial green that came back faithfully every single spring on its own, ready to be picked before anything else had woken from its winter sleep. She called it Mar, known in other places as Good King Henry. It was a true workhorse of the garden, producing nutritious dark green leaves year after year without any replanting or fuss. The taste was stronger than modern spinach, more robust and earthy, perfect for cooking into savory pies or simple sautés with garlic. For her, a plant that fed you forever after being planted just once was the definition of garden wisdom. It represented a partnership with the land, a quiet, dependable gift that renewed itself each spring without being asked. The bitter harvest after the frost. There was a tree in the corner of the yard with brilliant clusters of fiery red berries that were far too bitter to eat for most of the year. But my grandma, with her deep knowledge of nature's ways, would wait patiently. She watched the tree through the autumn, ignoring the tempting berries until after the first hard frost had come and coated the branches in a layer of ice. She said the frost was a signal, nature's way of performing a miracle that mellowed their bitterness and unlocked a complex, tart sweetness. Only then would she gather them to make infusions for winter spirits, or cook them down into a sharp, beautiful jelly to serve with roasted meats. It was a harvest that required perfect timing and trust, a lesson that some of the best things in life are not for the impatient. The first berry of summer. Long before the first strawberry even thought of turning red, we'd be out in the garden picking my grandma's favorite berries. They weren't round, but long and oblong, like tiny, stretched-out blueberries with a dusty blue skin that rubbed off on your fingers. These were haskap berries, or gimolost, one of the first fruits of the entire season. They were a welcome shock of sweet tart flavor after a long winter of root vegetables and canned preserves. Because they ripened so early, often when there was still a chill in the air, they felt like a special secret, a taste of the coming summer that arrived weeks ahead of schedule. They were a joyful beginning, the first bright notes in the garden's symphony of sweetness, and a delicious, private reward for making it through the cold. So, as we look back, this was never just about forgotten vegetables. It was about a forgotten mindset, resilience, patience, and the wisdom to find value where no one else thinks to look. From the ugliest roots to the most bitter berries, every plant in her garden had a purpose and a story. Her garden is long gone now, but the knowledge she planted there, that's a harvest that never truly ends. It's a legacy of survival and ingenuity that we can all learn from. Now, I want to hear from you. What forgotten foods or wisdom did your own parents or grandparents pass down? Share your story in the comments below. And if you believe this kind of knowledge is worth preserving, consider liking this video and subscribing for more journeys into our forgotten past.